Travelling to the interpretation station, please alight now.
Episode 12 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Please take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Interpretation Station. How are you all doing? I hope you're all well. 3 questions for you. Similar format to last time. Before we start. What does a small new town on the west coast of Ireland have to do with nuclear weapons? Question 2. Who are the Annex II bad boys? And question 3. Why does the C in the acronym, the FMCT, pose such a problem? And why has it actually stopped the Conference on Disarmament's work for the last, going on for 25 years? The answer to those questions and more, again, you will discover in the course of the next hour or so, as we take our first, there's a popular expression these days at the UN, we take our first deep dive into nuclear weapons. And yes, today, got my, I always like to have a few accoutrements, depending on which country we're doing. So today I have my Belgium scarf. This was from a match I went to Belgium against Scotland. Okay, that was a couple of years ago, back in the those crazy days when you actually had crowds at football matches. Can you imagine that nowadays? Anyway, yeah, so Belgium. We're going to be doing Belgium in the Conference on Disarmament, learning a bit about nuclear weapons treaties in the process. Before I go any further, I want to just reiterate a correction I made from last week's episode. So some of you might watch last week's episode. It was about Venezuela, and I made a bit of a talking about the non-aligned movement, if you recall, and I was telling you how, in addition to El Nam, sometimes the Latinos call the non-aligned movement El Opanal. That was I got confused. So actually, funnily enough, Opanal is a Latin American organization in the business of nuclear disarmament. What I meant to say was Emenoal. Okay, Emenoal. So I've written that correction in the description box of episode 11. So just so it's important just to know that distinction. It's okay. So the Spanish call NAM often Emenoal. Okay. Back to business here, then back to nuclear weapons. As I say, today's statement that we're going to be studying, it's from last year. It's going to be by the Belgian Foreign Minister Didier Reynders, and it was a statement he made to the Conference on Disarmament last year about the situation there. So before we go any further, give you a bit of background to what we're going to be doing today. Tell you a bit about the Conference on Disarmament, which is headquartered here in Geneva. And so it was created actually in 1978. It was recognized by the first special session on disarmament of the United Nations General Assembly. And this is, again, they often refer to this special session in 1978. It's sometimes known as SSOD1. These are important things to know, okay? And the Conference on Disarmament itself is known often as the CD. Okay, useful acronym. Not to be confused with the Disarmament Commission, by the way, which is located in Vienna. So these are separate. Now, the Conference on Disarmament is known as the Single Multilateral Disarmament Negotiating Forum of the International Community. Again, that's important bit of terminology to know, especially this single multilateral negotiating forum. It's important words to know. Now, what does the CD, what does it cover? Well, it covers pretty much all multilateral arms control and disarmament issues. So at the moment, for example, some of the big issues on its plate are, so again, this is important word terminology I'm going to be giving you, cessation of the nuclear arms race and nuclear disarmament, preventing a nuclear war, preventing an arms race in outer space, which, by the way, if you come across that, it's known by the acronym PAROS, which is used, okay, prevention of an arms race in outer space. To be honest, it's more for you Russizons out there who work from Russian, it tends to be something that maybe is discussed more by the Russians than delegations, French-speaking or Spanish delegations, but it's still an important concept to know, because often these sort of things boil down to the old classic, USA versus Russia. What else does the CD discuss? Reaching international arrangements to make sure that non-nuclear weapon states, so that's those countries that don't have nuclear weapons, sometimes referred to as the NNWSs, ensuring them against the use or the threat of the use of nuclear weapons. Again, that little phrase often comes in other contexts as well. The use or the threat of the use of force. Know that, okay? Also addresses new types of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs as they're known. And also is in the business of initiating programs in the field of disarmament and transparency in armaments. Now, the conference has a rotating presidency. You get 6 new presidents every year. This is a lot of changeover. Currently 65 member states. That number, I believe, has been higher and it's been lower, so it goes up and down. Now, it's back in the day, in its heyday, shall we say, it did negotiate, it did reach some big treaties that are still very important today. Perhaps the biggest of all being the NPT, so the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's the real big kahuna. Then in addition to that, there was also the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production and Stockpiling of Bacteriological and Toxic Weapons and on their destruction, which is more popularly known as the BTWC, okay, Biological Toxin Weapons Convention. Then there's also the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, Stockpiling, and Use of Chemical Weapons and their Destruction. So that was the CWC, Chemical Weapons Convention, as it's most commonly known, and most recently the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT. And here I'm going to place those acronyms in French because you want to know those. So you see you have the TNP for the NPT, the CIAC for the BTWC, CABT for the Chemical Weapons Convention, and the TICEN, okay, for the CTBT. And of those, again, the TNP and the TICEN are the ones you're going to probably encounter most frequently. Okay, so let's look at that most important one of them all, the NPT, which often they refer to as the cornerstone of the whole issue of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. So signed in 1968, entered force in 1970, and it prohibits non-nuclear weapon states from developing nuclear weapons. However, the NPT gives exemptions to the 5 nuclear weapon states as per when the agreement was signed in 1968. And we all know who the 5 nuclear weapon states are, don't we? Yeah, so the US, Russia, UK, France, and China. Now, why were they the ones given exemptions? Because those were, as per 1968, those were the 5 that had tested the nuclear weapons before the treaty was negotiated in 68. So those exemptions only apply up, to the up to that year, 68. On the other hand, to offset that exemption, there is a legal obligation in Article 6 of the NPT for the 5 nuclear weapon states to fully disarm at some point. So it's not all roses for the big boys. So, okay, they get to keep the weapons, but they've got to promise that they'll disarm at some point. So there are 3 in the NPT. The NPT is basically made up of 3 chief pillars. Okay, so that's disarmament, non-proliferation, the spread of nuclear weapons, and the other final treaty is actually the peaceful use of nuclear energy, the peaceful atom, as it's sometimes called. So the using nuclear energy for civilian peaceful purposes. Now, in addition to those 5 nuclear weapon states, you have 3 other nuclear armed states: India, Pakistan, and Israel, which is a sort of a bit of a grey area, Israel, because officially they don't have nuclear weapons, but everybody kind of knows that they do. Now, those states never actually joined the NPT, but they do possess nuclear weapons. You also have North Korea, which does possess officially nuclear weapons, and it used to be a member of the NPT. Obliged, and by becoming a member, it obliged not to develop nuclear weapons then. But the North Koreans withdrew from the NPT in 2003, and I believe they're the only country to have actually tested nukes this millennium, I believe. They've obviously come in for sanctions and all this kind of thing, but they have tested. The NPT, so it prohibits nuclear weapon states from transferring nuclear weapons or helping non-nuclear weapon states in the development of nuclear weapons. And on the other hand, the non-nuclear weapon states, their commitment is not to receive, manufacture, or acquire any new nuclear weapons, and to place all their nuclear materials and facilities under the safeguard system of the IAEA, so the International Atomic Energy Association. And again, I'm going to put the French acronym just here. Now, in that NPT, Article 6 of the NPT requires all the state parties to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament. That's another useful phrase to know, by the way. General and complete disarmament. We talk about it all the time. Treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. And there's no time frame given for this or any specific verification mechanism. But this is just part of this, putting the obligation on the nuclear weapon states to, at some point, stop the arms race and disarm in their own good time. Now, what about the non-nuclear weapon states? Well, in the meantime, there's some interesting examples. Many of these non-nuclear weapon states have set up what are called nuclear weapons-free zones, NWFZs. And by doing so, they've accepted legal obligations not to develop, manufacture, stockpile, acquire, possess, or control any nuclear explosive devices on their territories. And you've got there's a number of these all around the world, from the Arctic, from Africa, the Arctic, Caribbean. And then with the 2 treaties that you might hear quite a bit about popping up are the treaties of Tlatelolco which is so that's for Latin America. It's often mentioned. It's often mentioned by the Latin American countries, and the Treaty of Pelindaba, which is sort of in the Pacific, the South Pacific, nuclear weapons-free zone. And the big one that hasn't yet been achieved is I think they actually call it a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. And that's obviously a very hot potato because Israel, I guess, is in no mood at this point to agree to such a thing. They're not in a position to sort of surrender their unofficial nuclear arsenal. And then certain specific countries, a few interesting little tidbits here. So Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine, they all returned the big arsenals of nuclear warheads after the collapse of the Soviet Union back in the mid-90s, and then they joined subsequently the NPT as non-nuclear weapon states. By the way, warheads, nuclear warheads, is an important word to know. Ogive. Okay, note that one down, note that word. Brazil and Argentina also thought about launching nukes back in the day, but then decided not to. They joined the NPT in 94 and 95 as non-nuclear weapon states. I'll give you some figures. So these are articles I did, some research. I'm going to leave all the links to these articles in the description box, by the way. So I'm just quoting some of the figures here. This was an article written in, I think, 2018. Said that approximately 14,900 nuclear warheads remain in the arsenals of 9 states. Approximately 4,000 of these warheads are actively deployed. Now, an important since the NPT was signed, every 5 years, I believe it is, they have a RevCon, a review conference. And an important one was held in 1995. In 1995, the states parties agreed to indefinitely extend the treaty based on the package of decisions that included principles and objectives for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. This package called for a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, okay, a CTBT. Now, before that, there had been a partial test ban treaty, so this took it an extra step, calling for a comprehensive test ban treaty. This is the TISEN that I was talking about in French, as well as negotiations on a verifiable treaty banning the production of fissile material for nuclear weapons and for systemic and progressive efforts to reduce nuclear weapons globally. Now, this is where we're starting to come towards the stumbling block. So the package, for that package to be adopted, there was an agreement calling to include a call to states in the Middle East to accede to the NPT and for action to be taken towards creating this nuclear weapons-free zone, or a WMD-free zone in the Middle East. More recently, by the way, important, speaking of these NP RevCons, in 2010, so you had the US and Russia signing the New START Treaty. I think that with Obama and Medvedev, I think, were the respective presidents at the time. And that was at the first of a series of what are called nuclear security summits. And this was this was a big deal at the time. Obama said that it was a big step, that this would be a huge step towards a world free of nuclear weapons. A couple more figures. So the US has, since the end of the Cold War, reduced its stockpile by about 87%. So they used to have just over 31,000 warheads, ogive, in 1967. That's down to about 4,000. France has reduced its arsenal, the UK also. China is the only nuclear weapons state to be increasing its nuclear stockpile, albeit slowly. And it's also, and India and Pakistan are believed to have been increasing their stockpiles also. So under the New START, which is coming up for renegotiation next year, by the way, New START expires next year. So there's big question marks over whether they're going to extend it or not. Obviously, relations between the two aren't exactly super duper at the moment. So under the new-ish START, US and Russia agreed to have no more than 1,550 deployed nuclear warheads and 700 launches by 2018. Now, for entry into force of the CTB, for it to come into force, it requires ratification by all states who have nuclear power reactors or research reactors. Now, they are the Annex II states. This sort of brings us to who are the sort of Annex II bad boys. 8 of these Annex II states, including the United States and China, have yet to ratify the treaty. So they've signed it. US and China both signed it, but they haven't yet ratified, which means that it can't actually come into force yet. Now, they're not the only ones. There is also Egypt, Iran, and Israel. Again, they've all signed, but they haven't ratified. Even badder again are North Korea, India, and Pakistan, who haven't actually yet signed it even. So remember, those Annex II states, all of them have to have signed and ratified for the treaty to come into force. Now, if you recall, I was talking about the package. You had the agreement on the CTBT, and also discussions with a view to reaching a treaty on fissile materials. Now, what you may ask are fissile materials? Well, fissile materials are the elements that are required to make a nuclear weapon. So yeah, fissile materials, I think the two key ones that are most often referred to are the isotope of uranium known as U-238 and the isotope of plutonium, which is P-239. And then there's another uranium isotope, 235, which may or may not be suitable for creating a reaction that would be used as a nuclear weapon. So when they talk about fissile materials, those are the ones that are the most relevant ones. Now, what is the problem therefore here? So, as I say, discussions on the FMCT started back in 1995. Now, in 1995, an agreement was reached. A decision was reached. Its serial number was CD1299. Okay, that's the number you'll hear bandied about quite often, and it was called the Shannon Mandate. And we're about to find out now what the little Irish seaside town and nuclear weapons have to do here. Now, the Shannon Mandate was adopted in 1995. It proposed negotiation of a treaty banning the production of fissile material. And it was called the Shannon Mandate, not because it was signed in that town, but it was actually named after Ambassador Gerald Shannon of Canada, who was appointed by the Conference on Disarmament to seek the views of all the member states. So he basically chaired the process. And as well, until about a week ago, until I started doing more research into this issue, I was in blissful ignorance. I was blissfully in this, I had this impression that agreement had been signed in the Irish port town of Shannon. So in fact, the Irish port town on the west coast actually has absolutely nothing to do with nuclear weapons and everything to do with Mr. Gerald Shannon. Okay, now, problem is, the main problem here with the FMCT, therefore, is the situation that exists between Pakistan and India. And what has happened since 1995 is that basically Pakistan has blocked in any negotiations in the Conference on Disarmament over this. It keeps every year it refuses to join the consensus to even adopt the agenda. So as I say, the CD, it works on the basis of consensus, which means that even if just one country vetoes the plan of work, whatever it is, no one can work. So that's been a big problem ever since 1995. Now, Pakistan's fear is that its national security will be at risk if India is left with a larger existing fissile material stockpile, because then it will be able to produce nuclear weapons after the implementation of the treaty. Because you see, a cutoff, that cutoff would say be called in whatever year they finally agreed to sign it. It would prevent production after that year, but it wouldn't account for everything produced up till that point. And the Indians here have a big advantage over Pakistan. They have big stockpiles. So the Pakistanis argue that yes, an FMCT wouldn't address the existing stockpiles, which is why one of the options that they propose is to just have a fissile material treaty, no C. Okay, so that would address basically all fissile materials ever bought, ever mined, whatever. So that's why the C, the cutoff at this stage, is such a problem. And this problem is exacerbated by the fact you got an important deal that was struck back in 2005 between the US and India. Manmohan Singh, the then Indian Prime Minister, and George W. Bush. And under that agreement between the US and India, India agreed to separate its civil and military nuclear facilities, to place all its civil nuclear facilities under the IAEA Safeguards Agreement. Now remember, that IAEA Safeguards, that only applied to the states that had signed the NPT. India is not a signatory to the NPT, but through this deal reached with the Americans, they did agree to place their facilities under IAEA inspection verification. And in return for that, they got this rather juicy deal, I guess, with the Americans, that they could buy nuclear fuel from the Americans to power their civilian nuclear program. So as I say, one thing Pakistan has said is if they are offered a similar deal, a similar civil nuclear deal to the one given to India, then they may lift their veto on the FMCT negotiations. But there's not much sign of this happening at the moment. Apparently back in 2012, 2013, they did look like some compromise was going to be struck, which had something to do with moving discussions on the FMCT into a different forum. It would basically unblock the conference and disarmament by moving it to an other existing forum. But either way, it never happened, and so the CD continues to meet. I mean, in Geneva, it continues to meet on a regular basis. They have meetings, but it's all very theoretical. It's all very academic. It's basically discussing what they would do if, in the event that proper work could be resumed. So, really substantively, though, the CD is not really getting anything done anymore. So they had their heyday back in the 1980s, the 1990s. But now they are stuck. Now things are stuck. And I don't know if there's really any prospect anytime soon of things getting going again. So that's a bit of background for you to the topic. As I say, the sources that I was quoting, I'm going to quote them, give you the links to them, good articles that I found and I'm going to put them in the links in the description box. And well, without any further ado, I think we're going to move to the academic part of the episode. So we've got this video. So today's interpreter, it's Erin, who sent in her version of the statement by Didier Renders. So yeah, before we get started, just let me remind you then, as I always do, I always have to repeat this. I find, by the way, when you do this sort of thing with YouTube channels, you do start to repeat yourself a lot. I can't help it. I've got to say this. Okay, so go to the description box. In the description box, you'll see a link to the original statement by Mr. Renders. What you do is you listen to you go to the link, you listen to the recording, you interpret, you do a version of the statement. You then go to another link which has the print copy of that statement. You print it off, and then you just watch the episode, and you watch the interpretation station, and you take notes, and you learn new stuff about nuclear weapons. That's what you do. So yeah, I'm sorry if I repeat myself, but it's just it's part of the job. Okay, so with that, it's over to Erin. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks then. We'll give the floor to Erin. So just to remind you, this is Mr. Didier Renders, Minister for Foreign and European Affairs and Minister of Defence of Belgium. So let's see. You should have the written text in front of you there on the screen. So let's follow along with what Erin has to say.
Mr. President, allow me first of all to wish you every success in your capacity as the President of the Conference on Disarmament. Rest assured you have the full support of my country in your endeavours.
So our first para, very straightforward. President, so the Conference on Disarmament has a president, that's the first thing. Soyez assurés, rest assured. And also she said, yeah, dans votre fonction, she's in your capacity, which is very nice, better than in your function. Capacity is very good.
Arms control has reached a delicate point.
Okay, now why do I stop it just after this sentence? So, le contrôle des armements. I must admit, I hadn't done nuclear issues in some months before I did this. I listened to this the other day, and I mean, contrôle des armements, it's arms control. Everyone knows that. Except I hadn't done it in a few months, and it threw me. I was like, oh, control over armaments. That doesn't sound right, does it? I had to really think. Geez, it's arms control. So just make a point of knowing that. Okay, you're going to go into a nuclear text. Know the concept of arms control. There's no sort of deviation from it. That's what it is. And also, so find yourself a delicate. She said point. I was thinking a nicer word also might be at a delicate juncture, perhaps.
A crucial treaty for the security of Europe is at risk of breaking down in 6 months.
Okay, so s'effriter, not that common a word. I mean, so it says breaking down. I was thinking, so this treaty risks crumbling. I think it's more usually done with crumbling. Or you could talk about it fizzling out, if you really wanted to be very eloquent.
While another is slow to come into effect.
And she does that nicely. It's slow to come into effect. That almost threw me as well, actually. If you look at it, un autre tarde. Initially, I thought, is tarde a noun? And then I had to really look at it, and then, oh no, it's a verb. So it's slow to come into effect. Entre en vigueur, come into effect, come into force, by the way.
The deterioration of the global security situation and growing mistrust between powers reduces the room for manoeuvre for new initiatives. We all know the problems preventing the CD from playing the role for which it was created.
Okay, so this sentence here, empêche la conférence du désarmement. So yeah, prevent, for empêcher, that stops the CD from playing its role. Now, one thing I was just going to point out here, le rôle pour lequel elle fut créée. I don't know what it is, but in French, there are certain words, when you say them, when French speakers say them, it seems to trigger a need to get all slightly. It triggers the need to make a slightly pompous flourish. Now, in English, you see, we would just say, we all know what's stopping the CD from playing its intended role, let's say. But in French, le rôle, or something, la place, it seems to, as I say, trigger this need to say something slightly flowery, pour lequel elle faut créer, le rôle qui est le sien, le rôle qui est le vôtre. Yeah, so I mean, maybe this is just my experience. So I've noticed this, that 9 out of 10 times when you hear de jouer le rôle, and I know they're going to say something, an expression that's going to take about 5 or 6 words that in English could just be said in one. Okay, so here it's a classic case of its intended role, its anticipated role. But I mean, what Aaron said is also it's fine. You can just you can just mimic the way the French do it as well.
However, new opportunities are arising for those who wish to see them.
I like how she actually says arising for apparaître. I mean, you could just say appear, but arising is good.
Some changes that may be implemented in the short term could allow the CD to once again assume its role.
Okay, this is a slightly weird turn of phrase. Quelques inflexions réalisables. Speaking of slightly pompous flourishes. Now, I don't know if this is a Belgian thing. I mean, basically, what he's saying is that a few, feasible, some sort of headway, some sort of progress. She says changes. So I mean, it's all fine. It's just it's slightly odd wording, I find. So some a feasible or some viable progress in the short term could allow the conference, etc., etc.
As the only multilateral instrument for negotiation in the field of disarmament.
Okay, now this picks up on what I said in my introduction. So it's the single multilateral disarmament negotiating forum. Okay, so that's that single also. I think sometimes I've read Seoul as well, the Seoul Multilateral Negotiating Forum, but it's a single more often. But again, know that terminology. It's important.
I'd like to dwell on these opportunities a little.
Okay, that's nice. So for m'attarder, to dwell on, you can say to touch on as well.
Today. Firstly, I should broach the issue of a fissile material cut-off treaty.
Okay, so aborder, so to broach, you could say to address, number of ways. And so this is it. Un traité interdisant la production de matières fissiles. So the Fissile Material Cut-off Treaty, FMCT. And in fact, in the French, you can see destiné à la fabrication d'armes nucléaires, but everyone knows what you're talking about when you're talking about FMCT. We know it's about those materials are going to be used for nukes, so don't worry about that a bit too much.
Indeed, the stumbling blocks hindering the onset of negotiations are very well known. However,
this is an interesting word. Obviously, the French use this quite a bit, certes. So she's gone for indeed. One alternative, one solution I like to go for with certes is I often say granted. I'll say granted. The stumbling blocks, that's very good. Les points d'achoppement, stumbling blocks. Granted, they're well known, but blah, blah, blah. So that's how I like to do certes. Sometimes I'll also just say yes, the stumbling blocks are well known. So it's up to you. Find something that you're comfortable with.
the work carried out by experts in recent years has allowed the groundwork to be laid and points of substance to be defined to then be elaborated upon at a later stage.
Okay, so just to lay the groundwork, which is okay. I think you could say it maybe a bit more snappily, pave the way, set the stage. Those two are always my sort of go-to phrases for that concept. Pave the way and set the stage. And then, okay, à élaborer ultérieurement. And I don't like elaborate. I've probably mentioned this before. I prefer. I mean, it's okay, you know, but to be developed, perhaps to be built on. I think sounds better English. To be expanded on.
The report of the preparatory group set out all of the potential provisions of such a treaty.
Okay, so you had the preparatory group of high-level experts. Okay, so this is just a word, you know, disposition. So as she said, the provisions. That's a very important word to know. It might, you know, if you're a beginner, you know, in your early days, it might escape you. So if you are in your early days of doing this kind of thing, yeah, remember disposition are provisions.
It also clearly demonstrated that one of the most contentious points.
Okay, again, contentious. So contentieux, you could say contentious points or divisive. I guess she's used the idea of stumbling blocks a couple of sentences before, so it might not sound that good if you repeat it, but yeah, divisive, contentious.
Namely that of stockpiles, is not a mere binary choice.
Okay, so les stocks, so it's important. In English, we say stockpiles. Okay, and I like how she's gone with this. Ne se résume pas à un choix binaire. She says it's not a mere binary choice. I was thinking maybe doesn't just boil down to a binary choice. Doesn't just come down to.
Therefore, this issue cannot be resolved solely within the framework of negotiating a treaty.
So this is a slight contresens here, she says, actually. So dès lors, that's good, therefore. So what he's actually saying, this problem, this issue, if you like, can only be solved in the context of negotiating a treaty. So I think the way she rendered it came across that it's not that you have to do something in addition to negotiating the treaty, but it's very much his meaning here is that it can only be done within the framework, within the context of a treaty.
Therefore, we share the assessment made by the president of the preparatory group, namely that the...
Okay, so yeah, I like what she's done with évaluation, the assessment. Like I prefer that to the English calc evaluation. By the way, if it's a preparatory group, it's more likely to be a chairwoman of the preparatory group. These working groups it's usually going to be a chairman.
Preparation stage may be concluded, and the negotiation stage for a treaty may begin. Mr.
Okay. Again, if you're a beginner, yeah, entamer, you know, to begin, to be launched, you could say, if you want to get a bit more stylish.
President, to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons.
Okay, world free of nuclear weapons. I say there's lots of things that are free of, as you've maybe already seen, nuclear weapons free world, weapons of mass destruction free zones. To achieve a world free of nuclear weapons,
we must redouble our efforts to implement a comprehensive, verified ban on nuclear tests.
Yeah, that's nice. Well, this little bit here, interdiction globale et vérifiée. So I was in two minds initially about global. You know, sometimes there is that tendency to want to, can you just do the calc, a global ban? But I think if the French have that, if the French speakers want to have that meaning, they're more likely to say mondial. I think. So yeah, comprehensive and verified ban on nuclear tests, especially as of course, the treaty itself is called the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty.
We therefore deplored the postponement of the entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty.
Okay, so she's gone here with the calc here. So we deplore. I think here, usually when I hear deplorer in French, I'll almost always go to regret. Okay, we regret the postponement of the entry into force. Deplores again. It's not wrong, but I think regret sounds more naturally English. And then there's the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, CTBT,
which was negotiated here at this August platform over 20 years ago.
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot. The French speakers tend to talk a lot about Auguste Enceinte, so I tend to go with this August Forum. In these hallowed halls is another one, perhaps, that you might like to try out.
At the same point, a glimmer of hope appeared with the announcement that nuclear tests are no longer being carried out by the only state to have done so this century.
Okay, so yeah, she uses the right word here. So a lueur d'espoir, a glimmer of hope. That's very good. Yeah, the l'arrêt annoncé. So I think she says the announced stopping of tests. I think you would probably say suspension. I think if you really want to get the best English word here, it'd probably be the declared, the announced suspension of nuclear tests by the only state to have carried out any this century. So this is obviously a reference to North Korea. DPRK, if you want to give them the official name. It's important to know DPRK. I think they perhaps even prefer being called DPRK to just plain old North Korea. Similarly, South Korea, South Korea, their official name is the Republic of Korea, as opposed to South. So
this hope must nonetheless be borne out, namely through the perpetuation, the irreversibility, and the monitoring of this declaration.
Okay, there's some interesting words here that it's a sort of sentence that if you were to hear it, you'd understand it perfectly fine. But it's just turning some of these slightly trickier words into good English. So I was thinking here, okay, cet espoir doit se confirmer. What we say in English, this hope needs to be converted into reality, maybe. I mean, you could say it needs to be confirmed, but it doesn't sound very nice. Substantiated, perhaps, was another idea I had. And, and then she goes about notamment par la pérennisation. Okay, l'irréversibilité et contrôle. So I like what she says for pérennisation. She used the perpetuation. I think that's the French talk a lot about pérennisation. I think more than we do in English, but that's just a very good go-to word to have. Don't think about doing just pérennisation, perpetuation, pérenniser, perpetuate. It works well. And then okay, control. She's gone for monitoring this declaration. I would perhaps say oversight, overseeing this declaration. I think, or verifying. See, with nuclear weapons, they tend to talk more about, issue of oversight, or verifying. Monitoring is okay.
This treaty is an indispensable instrument in this respect.
Now, here's an interesting word, incontournable. So the French, they use this word all the time. Okay, so Erin's gone with an indispensable instrument, which is a pretty good stab at it. If you go to the dictionary for incontournable, you'll see like inevitable. And I, for a long time, was going is like just saying a key instrument, a central instrument. But I think I've come up with my favorite, and I think the register is just about right. A go-to. It's become a go-to instrument in that respect. As I say, I was just wondering if in this specific case, the register was just slightly lower than suitable, but I think 9 times out of 10 for incontournable, you can say the go-to instrument. Okay.
North Korea's accession to the CTBT must therefore form part of the solution aimed at the denuclearization of the country.
Okay, so actually you've gone with the right word there, l'adhésion du Corée du Nord au TIS. So yeah, the accession. So they often talk about denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Often the Russians will talk about that, denuclearization of the Korean peninsula.
However, the mere entry into force of the CTBT allows for the implementation of all verification measures provided for in the treaty.
Okay. Prévu dans le traité. That's like provided for in the treaty. I mean, other alternatives. That tends to be, again, the choice incontournable for prévu. You can also say stipulated in the treaty, envisioned in the treaty.
Positive movement by other states in Annex 2 towards accession to the treaty remains therefore necessary.
Okay, so here we are, these Annex 2 states. We all know who those are, and the bad boys among them. This is a phrase that used quite a bit. It's very high registered. De mise. So it just means necessary, called for.
We are very pleased that movement towards accession to the CTBT is ongoing, with recent ratification by Thailand and Zimbabwe, and with signature by Tuvalu. As a co-coordinator of the Article 14 process along with Iraq, Belgium shall continue to promote the entry into force of the treaty and shall encourage further accession.
Okay, so this bit it's fairly straightforward, and Erin reels it off very nicely. Just one thing I should maybe point out. So the Article 14 process, you might be wondering what that is, and I myself was wondering what that was. So I've looked it up. So apparently the Article 14, I get this actually from the CTBTO's own web page. By the way, here the CTBTO, the O stands for organization. So apparently the treaty contains a special mechanism to promote its entry into force. A conference designed to facilitate this objective takes place every other year. While its official designation is the Conference on Facilitating Entry into Force of the CTBT, it is more commonly known as the Article 14 Conference in accordance with the relevant treaty article. 6 such conferences have taken place every alternate year since 1999. Okay, so it's I guess it's a biannual conference that's basically provided for within the Article 14 of the treaty itself. And yes, it was good. So again, good words. Entrée en vigueur, entry into force, nouvelles adhésions, accessions.
Once again, we reaffirm that accession to the CTBT cannot be conditional upon the action of other states.
Okay, this is nice. I like this French construction here. Ne saurait être. It's very high register. Okay, meaning it cannot be. So she's and I like what she's done. So I when I did it myself beforehand, I got a bit stuck on this. But yeah, it cannot be conditional on basically on the actions of other states. So what she's saying is that you cannot condition what you're going to do on what other states do. You know, you have to act off your own at your own behest, as it were. Okay, voluntarily, with your own proactively, if you like. So yeah, subordinate, conditional, or cannot be subject to the action of other states. Maybe another alternative.
Our work for all on the treaty will not be completed by the time my country's mandate comes to an end.
Okay, achever, that's a very important word. Again, if you're a beginner, you might stumble on it. So yeah, this means completed, is concluded, completed.
But the enthusiasm of the youth group for the treaty gives me hope.
Okay, so you need, okay, so he says, mais le dynamisme et l'enthousiasme. So I was thinking, okay, she says the enthusiasm. I mean, you don't need to have both words. Dynamism, we don't tend to say in English the dynamism. So I was thinking maybe the vigor and enthusiasm, the zeal and the enthusiasm. Though zeal can sometimes have a negative connotations, can sometimes suggest that a person's going just a bit too far. So no, that's the vigor, let's say. Within the this group, just for the record, is called the CTBTO Youth Group. Okay, so it's for youngsters who are very exercised by the whole theme of nuclear disarmament.
I'm sure that the group will work as a force of inspiration and a reminder of our collective duty to future generations to achieve a world without nuclear tests.
Okay, so I was gonna, yeah, un monde sans essai nucléaire, a world without nuclear tests. So yeah, I get you could probably say a nuclear test-free world would probably get you the top marks. But yeah, you could say a world free of nuclear testing or nuclear tests as well.
Mr. President, mistrust between powers has risen, and the lack of respect of the provisions of treaties is certainly a factor of this.
Okay, just a couple of very small things here. You could, when they say in French, le non-respect, I'm fine with saying non-respect, to be honest. I think that's okay. Les dispositifs des traités, again, so provisions, like disposition, I think we had earlier. Maybe on the second page. Again, dispositif, provisions, articles. I'd play safe and go with provisions.
As we are currently seeing in Europe, a bilateral treaty that is only respected by one state sees its foundations start to crumble.
Okay, so Mr. Renders, he likes this idea of s'effriter, s'effondrer. So yeah, its foundations crumble. She's gone for, and maybe it's a bit. I think that's good, or you just see his foundations erode is another synonym. Collapse is a bit stronger, but again, perfectly acceptable.
The disappearance of the INF Treaty would have serious consequences for the global arms control system.
Okay, so this is a pretty important treaty. Okay, Traité sur les forces nucléaires intermédiaires. So in French, FNE. So in English, the INF Treaty. So its full name is the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And this is a treaty that there was quite a lot of media focus on this a couple of years ago. So President Trump in 2018 said he was withdrawing the US from that treaty, alleging Russian non-compliance. So this treaty, it's one of these treaties that tends to get discussed more by the Russians than maybe the Western Europeans, but it's still important to know. So it was actually signed by Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev back in 1987. So it goes back a long way, and it banned all of the two nations' land-based ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and missile launchers, all intermediate range missile launchers and missiles. So it didn't apply to sea or air launched missiles, but land-based. And as I say, this was quite an important, treaty overall. So yeah, the US suspended the treaty in February 2019, and then the Russians did so on the following day, and so the US formally withdrew from the treaty on the 2nd of August 2019. So it's a useful one to know. The idea of land-based nuclear weapons, intermediate range. I think I did another video. I think it was in one of the Russian language videos. I was discussing this at a bit more length. This treaty, knowing aware of the difference between short range, intermediate range, and long range. Those little, again, terminology is important. If you're going to go into a meeting on nuclear weapons in whatever format it may be, these things might come up. The ranges, where they're based, are they land-based, air-based, or air-based or sea-based? Okay, these are handy things to know.
And a dangerous gap would be left.
A dangerous gap, Erin talks about, which is okay. Perhaps here, a dangerous void. I guess that's the closest to un vide. I think perhaps would sound good. Dangerous vacuum, void. Gap is perhaps the third best out of those three, but again, acceptable.
Inaction surrounding this development is beyond belief, and I call upon Russia in particular to respect their obligations.
So here, Erin talks. She says that inaction, on these developments, which is good for evolution. It wouldn't sound right in English to say evolution. Sometimes there are some instances where you can talk about an evolution as a calc, but not here. These developments is sort of beyond belief. Here, I actually think is inconceivable. Here, actually, with inconcevable, I think you can go with the English calc here. It works quite well. Inconceivable. I call it, especially on Russia, to respect its obligations. So I'm going to actually stop here. I'm going to split this statement up into two. I am going to do a sequel here to do the other half. There's a lot of good material here in the statement, both in terms of the language he uses, because it's a very high register he's using generally throughout the statement, and also the references he's making to the various instruments, in the field of disarmament, non-proliferation, etc. So yeah, we'll stop there for now, and we'll be coming back to this probably in a couple of weeks' time. Okay, so that brings me then to the fun part at the end here, to Roland's magic moments. So, what are Roland's hotly anticipated 3 magic moments of the day? Well, number 3, question number 3, are actually 2 words that we came across in this text: dispositif and disposition, which of course mean. Remember these 2 words basically as meaning provisions. Okay, it's a very important word to know. And as just a bonus to that, often you're going to get in discussions in all organizations, not just the UN, anywhere, when they're discussing resolutions and so on, and when you've got like a text, a decision, a resolution that's about to be adopted, you will find that you have les dispositions préambulaires and des dispositions opérationnelles. So the préambulaires are the preambular provisions, often just known as the PPs. PP1, PP2, that means preambular paragraph 2. And the OPs, operative paragraphs, OP1, OP3. So the operative paragraphs are the ones basically telling you what to do. The preambular paragraphs set the scene. The operative paragraphs basically hand out the instructions saying you shall do this. The countries commit to doing this, that, and the other. So those are 2 very, those are 2 very important words, concepts to know. In second place, second magic moment, is the acronyms for these treaties. Know their French equivalents, counterparts. Okay, so the NPT, crucial treaty, NPT in English, TNP in French. And you want to probably learn them in Spanish and Russian as well if you're doing them. And CTBT is le Thyssen you'll often hear in French used. The French aren't big on acronyms often, but that's one that that's one they do like to use. And then finally, my top magic moment of the day. Again, my idea, as I say, this word incontournable. I really like using go to for that. It's worked very well for me. It's very snappy, and I think it really reflects well the meaning of the word when the French use it. So yeah, incontournable, go to. So that brings us pretty much to the end of today's episode. Now, I've got to do all my repetitions again before I finish. So I've got to tell you to, after you've watched the video, if you liked what you've seen, smash the thumbs up button. If you haven't subscribed, consider doing so. Click the subscribe button down there. Tell your friends all about the channel. Just to let you know, so I think we're on 47 subscribers at the moment. The 100th subscriber will be receiving that unique piece of China, never mind your Royal Daltons or your Waterford Crystal or anything like that. It's the interpretation station mug that is that's the one everyone's after. So when I'm getting close to 100 subscribers, sign up your mum, sign up your grandparents, so they can be the lucky ones to get that first interpretation station mug. And that's pretty much it, I think. So to conclude, so again, on a Belgium theme, since this has all been about Belgium, you know what? After been working for a good couple of hours now doing this, I think I've deserved some of the Belgian monks' finest. All of this stuff. It's been a pleasure. And all that remains to be said is that episode 12 of the interpretation station is adjourned. See you next time. Au revoir.
The train is now leaving the interpretation station. We hope you enjoyed your visit. Until next time, folks.